Good morning, everyone. Once again, we are in Perek Gimel of Sefer Nechemia. And before we start Perek Gimel, what I actually want to do is refer you to it for a moment, and I put this up on screen, to this page. This is Perek Gimel as well. This is what we're going to be studying today on this page. And the reason I did it this way is because Perek Gimel is a list. And it's a list of all of the people who were involved in rebuilding the walls of Yerushalayim in the time of Nechemia. There are a lot of different maps. We don't know for sure. A very simplified map is this one that I also sent to you. And just very simply, they started at the northeast corner and then went counterclockwise around the city to repair the map, or at least this is the way it's described. It was being done, obviously, simultaneously, but the description is going to take us counterclockwise. What the highlighted chapter, however, highlights, I guess that's what a highlighted chapter does. What it highlights is some important pieces we need to pull out from the list. First of all, if you look, the red are the various major gates that were built or rebuilt by Nechemia's people. And so it's starting from the top, you have the Shar Hatzon, which is translated as the sheep's gate, that goes up here. Then you have afterwards the Shar Hadagim, the fish gate that goes over there. And I'm just going down on about the sixth line of the text. You see the Shar HaYeshana, okay? The older gate, the old gate. Then you go about 6, 7 lines further down in Pasuk Yud Gimel, you have Shara Hagai, the gate to the valley. Then you have the next two red ones. One is called Shara HaSafot, Shara HaAshpot. It's the same gate, the Dung Gate. One time it's written without an aleph, and one it is with an aleph. Then you have Shara Ha'ayin in Pasuk Tedvav. Then in Pasuk Chavav, towards the bottom of the page, you have Shara Hamayim, the water gate. No jokes anymore. Pasuk Chavchet, you have Shar HaSusim, and also in Chavtet, you Shar HaMizrach, and then finally, 2 lines from the bottom, you Shar HaMifkad, and that's the last gate before we get back, what's referred to as the muster gate, the last gate we get until we get back again to that northeastern corner. So you see there are 10 gates that are mentioned within this text. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is, if you notice, there are a number of watchtowers or turrets that are built into the gate. Those are the green. Migdal Hameam, Migdal Hananel, Migdal Tanurim, Migdal Yotzei Beit HaMelech Elyon, the tower that goes out of the upper king's palace, Migdal HaYotzei, Migdal HaGadol HaYotzei. We see that there are some towers that were also built or rebuilt. The last thing, the last thing, which I want to just highlight on this, is if you look at the yellow. Now, the yellow is whenever the verb to build is used. And if you notice, there's not that much building that's taking place. Vayivnu, vanu, vanu, that's 4 already at the top, 5, 6, 7. Okay, there's 7 things that they built. Versus the blue, which hechaziku or lechazak, lechazek, to strengthen, is an element of fortifying or rebuilding, not total building, remodeling. And if you look, the amount that had to be rebuilt, the word which has chazak associated with it, is significantly more, which all of this together tells us a picture of this project that Nechemia took on. Number 1 is, the wall was in shambles, there's no question. But the vast majority of the wall was there in some form or another. It didn't require new construction. There was small portions of the wall that had to be totally rebuilt. And that's wherever you have that verb. You also know that in terms of this building, we have the 10 gates. We don't know for sure where the 10 gates are. There are all sorts of theories that are associated to where the 10 gates are. We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence. In fact, one of the only areas which we seem to have clear evidence on in terms of some of these gates are in Ir David, which we'll see along the southeastern portion. There's evidence nowadays, and also the broad wall, which we see in the Rova, when you go into the Jewish quarter today, there's a section of wall which was from Chizkiyahu's time, actually known as the Broad Wall, which is also mentioned here in our text. It's on the Broad Wall itself is found on the northwestern side of the city. We have those things. We do have basically an artist rendition also of what we're talking about in terms of a city. And let me bring that map up. Okay, and for those who are online, again, I will try to bring it up. It's this one that's very pretty. Okay, and if you look, again, you can hold all these maps together, if you want to, you can see how they all align one way or the other. You notice that it goes down at the southern side is where it has the Dung Gate. It is different than the Shar HaShpot of today. It's a different gate, a different Shar HaShpot. We have the Shar HaShpot by the Kotel. Okay, this is a different gate. This is at the southernmost tip of Ir David. Okay, and then you notice when you move up, and again, all of this is artist renditions based on archaeological evidence it is. And as you move up, you see what they refer to as the Eastern Hill, the Central Valley, the Nachal Kidron is right at the bottom of this page. Okay, and you see all the way at the top on the right side, you see where Har HaBayit was. Okay, where the Temple Mount is. Again, we're talking about a city at that time that had somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 people. It wasn't a massive city when it was rebuilt. It was a relatively small city at this time. It would grow, obviously, as the years go on. Yeah.
The Beis Hamikdash completed at this point?
Well, it depends. The Beis Hamikdash was completed in the sense that phase one of the rebuilding project. Okay, phase one of the rebuilding project was enough to have a mizbeach, right? Second temple, there is no ark, there's no aron. Okay, that was hidden during the first Beit HaMikdash, and so we have pieces of it still there. There was some kind of building. There was the Kodesh HaKodeshim. It would be rebuilt in greater majesty and greater beauty as the time goes on, leading up to the Beit HaMikdash of Herod, which Herod had built. And if you, even in this picture, my guess is that what you're seeing in this picture on this, on this artist rendition, that's really based on Herod's temple. It's probably not the kind of building that was there when Nechemia comes. When Nechemia comes, we know there's a mizbeach. It's probably a much more modest kind of building that had been built. Yeah.
Where's Ezra now?
Ezra is partner in it. We don't see Ezra and Nechemia working together too much until a little bit later. Right now, Nechemia is taking this lead. And remember, Ezra and Nechemia had two different roles. Even though both of those roles contained aspects of the other's role. Ezra was more of a religious leader. Okay, he was, even though, he was from Malchut Beit David, he was more of the religious leader, the spiritual leader. He did not exercise his political power. Nechemia was more of a political leader. He had come from the court of the king of Artaxerxes, and he was granted power as a pacha, as one of the pashas, the governors of this specific area, which was a sub-government of the governor of Aver HaNahar. And in fact, if you recall, even from last week or the week before, we even talked about there were some Jews who were considered under Nechemia's rule. They were the people who came back with Nechemia or with Ezra or even Zerubbabel. And then there were the Jews who had remained during the years of Galut, and those years of Galut are over 100 years we're talking about. And those were most likely, and this was where the Malbim had talked about it a couple of weeks ago, where they were under the control of the Pacha of Aver HaNahar, of the broader area of the whole Western government of the Persians. So these are the maps. This is the big picture ideas that we need to know. Majority was remodeling, rebuilding, strengthening. The small portion was building from the beginning. Again, 10 gates. Those gates, where the location of those gates are, not 100% sure, but we do know they start at the northeast corner, because we're talking about, and if you look in Pasuk Aleph, Vayakom Eliashiva Kohen Gadol ve'achav Kohanim v'yivnu et Shar Hatzon. They built the Sheep's Gate. Now, why do I say it starts from the northeast, and why are we taking this approach? So the Shar Hatzon, according to the Ralbag, to many Meforshim, this was the way that they would actually lead the sheep into the Beit HaMikdash for the purposes of korbanot and other supplies they needed for the korbanot. So we know where that sheep's gate would make sense to be immediately adjacent or leading into Temple Mount. That would make all the sense in the world. What's even more interesting, and this Zakheim mentions, and again, Zakheim's commentary, which he wrote on Sefer Nechemia, is a relatively recent one, and he is looking at it from a political perspective. Zakheim's, because he had served administrations in Washington himself, Zakheim points out, he says, if you look also at who the characters are in terms of what the government and what had to take place, that Nechemia, according to him, had to create these coalitions to be able to rebuild and to succeed in the rebuilding. There were a lot of different interest groups. And so he starts first and foremost, because he wants to be building the Beit HaMikdash, with the Kohen Gadol. Give the kavod to the Kohen Gadol. Zakheim is looking at it from and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, he's looking at it almost from a Machiavellian perspective. How do you take care of what you need to take care of? What's the most efficient and approach politically to manage it? It's not just that Nechemia said, oh, you're the Kohen Gadol, I got to give you all the kavod, according to him. Others would say, no, you always have to start from the Beit HaMikdash, you start the Shar Hatzon. If you're starting from the rebuilding the wall around the Beit HaMikdash, then you give it to the Kohen Gadol. It's interesting when we're going to see in terms of the different groups, and it's a little complicated sometimes to see them, but when you look at the different groups in this big description, you'll see that there are different interest groups. There were the guilds. We're going to deal with the people, for example, who were the smiths and the ones who mix perfumes. We're going to deal with people who were building their homes next to other homes, the wall next to their homes. We're going to deal with significant leaders that existed at that time. All of these possibilities we're going to be looking at. So he starts with the Shar Hatzon, which ve'achav kohanim v'yivnu et Shar Hatzon. Hema kishuhu. They sanctified that portion, that Shar Hatzon, they sanctified. It was a rebuilding. It was a new building, I'm sorry. It was a new building. Remember that verb, va'yivnu. They had to sanctify it. Now, why did they have to sanctify it? Professor Zer Kavod suggests very simply because it was actually an extension. It was an area which hadn't been built before. It was outside the sanctified area of Yerushalayim. And so they added it on. They co-opted this area into it via a Kedusha. And vayamidu dal totav va'ad migdal hame'ah kidshu ad migdal Chananel. And they continued to work on this area all the way first over to the Migdal Hameah. Now, again, if you look at either one of, there's three different charts you could look at, but I'm going to stay with the one which is the most colorful. If you look at that one, which is the model, with the full drawing, so you'll notice that you start out over, again, at the Sheep's Gate. Here he has the Sheep's Gate right where you have the Beit HaMikdash, on the other side of the Beit HaMikdash. Then you move to the Migdal Hameah. Why was it called Migdal Hameah? Well, it is possible that it was a place that kept 100 soldiers. The Medrash talks about it was a place where they always made sure there were 100 brachot that were recited. It's the gate of the 100. We're really not sure why it was called Migdal Hameah, but they did it all the way over to the Gate of Chananel. Gate of Chananel, again, is along the north wall. We're not really sure where. We don't have any remnants of the Shar Hatzon, the Migdal Hameah, or the Migdal Chananel. Va'al Yado, and then the next portion that was being built, Vanu Anshe Yericho. The next group who were building were the people from Yericho. Now, why is Yericho jumping into this? Yericho was a very, very prosperous city, a very significant city. If you remember, even in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, Yericho was used as like a secondary location for supplies and things like that for the Beit HaMikdash. It was a beautiful oasis that had tremendous assets. And again, according to Dov Zakheim, what they're doing is they're trying to bring in, to engage these groups of people who have positions of power or authority early on in the rebuilding. And so give Yericho the covenant. It's not the place that's closest to Yericho, because if you think about it, Yericho is to the east, and they're already along the northwest, closer northwest than northeast. Va'al yado, and then afterwards, and now we are again still in Pasuk Bet, Vana Zakur ben Imri. Zakur ben Imri was the next person who had a portion in the building of the wall. Ve'et Shar Hadagim Banu. And they built the Shar Hadagim. Now, Shar Hadagim was most likely right next to the fish market. Okay, so if you look, if you're driving down the expressway and you go under South Water Market, okay, why is South Water Market called South Water Market? Because it was the water market. That's where they held the fish. South, you had all the fish stores there. You had all the fish suppliers were there around South Water Market. The same thing. Most likely, Shar Hadagim is because of the fact that's where they brought the fish in. Bnei Sanaa, Hema. Keru ve'amidu daltotav man ulav uvrichav, and then the Bnei Sanaa, they were the ones who actually put a roof over that area, over the gates, and they put up the doors for the gate, the locks for the gate, the hinges for the gate. Va'al yadam hechazik miremot ben Uriah ben Hakotz. The next portion of the wall was strengthened by Miremot. Now, Miremot we know of from Sefer Ezra. Remember, we're always looking at these important people. Who was he? We know he was the treasurer of the Beit HaMikdash. Treasurer of the Beit HaMikdash is a significant position of authority. And so he's there as well. Va'al yadam echazik mishulam ben berechia ben mishezavel. And then the next one who is along this building path is Mishulam. Now, yeah.
Does the group that erects each one of them, is that going to be their door because it's got the locks and the bars? Are they the ones who get the keys? But say
not necessarily. That was their cover. By the way, we do this nowadays. Everybody wants to have, and there were in the Beit HaMikdash. We know there were plaques.
Yeah,
okay.
That's what I want.
Yeah, we had Shar Nikanor. Okay, a very significant. The gateways into the inner chamber area of the inner courtyard was named for Mr. Nikanor. Okay, so the idea of putting plaques, I don't know if they're plaques to the extent that we have across the street where it looks like a giant yard site plaque, the building, but they had plaques, they had recognition that was given, but in this case, the recognition is most likely being given for the opposite reason. Give them the covet so that they buy into the process. Meshulam is a fascinating one. Meshulam we're going to encounter again in Perek Vav. One of Meshulam's sons marries into Tovia's family. If you remember the three antagonists who were involved here, one of the three, Sanbalat's the most famous, but Tovia was one of the three. So according to, again, and I'm quoting Zakheim on the political side of it, Zakheim says the reason why Meshulam is mentioned so early in the process is because we weren't really sure whose side he was on. So Nechemia gave him an important job up front to try to bring him over to his side. Va'al yadam hechazik Tzadok ben Ba'ana. And then came Tzadok, did the next portion. We're turning around the wall. Va'al yadam hechaziku hatkoin. Okay, the next group of people who were involved in the building were the people from Tekoa. Tekoa, if you remember, is in the Gush Etzion. Okay, Tekoa is the other side of Efrat. It's a mountaintop. It was a fortress city. It's a fascinating place. I remember the first time I ever went there, it was a little nothing, and now it's become a real big city. But to get there, the road goes, you feel like you're going straight up. Okay, to go up to that area, you see how it could be so fortified. Okay, and you just keep on moving up. We have a former Chicagoan who lives there. Jordana Cope lives up on the top of Tekoa. So some of you may know her Ron Cope and others in the family. But that's Tekoa. Now, why would Tekoa be given this covenant? Well, Tekoa was given a covenant again. It was a significant stronghold. But there was an interesting problem in Tekoa. Va'adirehem lo hiviu tzavaram ba'avodat adoneim. The leaders, the Adirehem, the powerful ones, that was the leadership of Tekoa, or as Rashi says, the wealthy people of Tekoa, did not help out in the process. They were not carrying anything. They weren't doing anything. They weren't taking care of their share of the responsibility. Now Rashi and the other medieval commentators, our classic commentators, even Ezra as well, looked this as a very negative to the people of Tekoa. That what the text is saying is the machers, they didn't want to have anything to do with this. Okay, it was just the plain people. Interestingly, Professor Zer Kavod in the Dat Mikra in his early commentary actually sees this as a compliment to the people of Tekoa, that the other people always wanted to make sure that the machers were the guys who were in the pictures. They were the ones who were getting the coffin. According to him, what they said, what this means is that the machers let the plain people be involved in this process, and that they were more democratic in a sense of who got to work on what. We're not sure what it is, but we do know we're moving around the wall, okay? And we're going to keep on going around the wall. That Shar HaYeshana. Now we go to the Shar HaYeshana. So if you're looking at the map, we're definitely, the Shar HaYeshana is already on the west side of the city. It is called the Gate of Yeshana, apparently, the old gate on this map. Vashar Yeshana, Hechaziku Yoyada ben Paseach, Umishulam ben Sudaya. And this was already strengthened by Yoyadam. Now, what is the Shar Yeshana? Very simply, the Ralbag says this was an old gate. This was the old gate that was there. In fact, the Dat Mikra points out that if you look back in Malachim Aleph, Perek Tet, Pasuk Tet Vav, you'll see there's a Shar Yeshana. It's the time from Shlomo HaMelech. This gate had existed for so long, and they went ahead and they strengthened it. Val Yadam Echazik, Melatya Givoni v'Yadon HaMeronati, Anshe Givon v'Amitzpeh l'Chisei Pachat Ever HaNahar. The next group of people, if you notice, includes Givonim. Now, Givonim are classic people. We know the people of Givon. And also the people of Mitzpeh. Mitzpeh is in Binyamin, not far. It's nowadays, Mitzpeh is a little south of Ramallah. Ramallah, Ramot, all of these names, by the way, in that area outside Yerushalayim, to the north of Yerushalayim, are because of the hills. Ram, it's a high place. So you have Ramot, you have Ramallah, and those areas there. When you look there, they went ahead and they did their piece. But what did they do? They built a Kisei Pachat Ever HaNahar. They built a throne, a seat for the governor of Ever HaNahar. According to Rashi, what they literally did is they created a place in Yerushalayim, in this rebuilding, that when the governor of the larger region would show, he had his seat where he was going to be able to sit. Why would they do this? Now, simply the Ralbag says because they were still under the control of the overall governorship of Ever HaNahar, of the Trans-Potomac area. Others suggest, okay, that these may not have been people, and this goes back to that Malbi from a couple of weeks ago. These were the people who had never gone into Galut, and so there were two different governing bodies that ruled over the Jews. There was a governing body that was headed by Nechemia. He was ruling with the people who were the Shavei Tzion, who were the people who were returning. Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nechemia. He had that control. But the Jews who had never left were over the Ever Nahar, and so they had a responsibility to take care of that area as well. Now, the Mitzudat David says that this was like almost like a throne room they created for him. We continue. Al Yado Echazik Uziel ben Charhaya Sorfim. Next come the people who are the Sorfim. The Sorfim simply are the smiths, okay? Meaning they were the ones who were the metal workers. So you have a guild. Ba'al Yado Echazik Hananya ben Harakachim. And then came the ones who were nowadays, Rokeach is actually a pharmacist. But normally the way this would be, in this case, this is the people who mixed different kinds of samim, different kinds of spices. Okay, so because Rokeach is literally someone who grinds the things up and creates it. So you can have a pharmacist who's making by grinding up different kind of medicines and combining it. And you can have also the person who's mixing up the spices. And the way they used samim in those days were to perfume. And so you'll see that translation, perfumers generally. And they strengthened Yerushalayim. And Azivah, if you remember, is a row of bricks, and they strengthened Yerushalayim all the way up to, and here you have the broad wall, HaChomah HaRechava. Now, if this Chomah HaRechava is the broad wall in the Rova, there are those who theorize it is. This is still talking about the broad wall that was part of the Rova. It fits in terms of where the location would have been. We have the broad wall from the first temple area, first temple time, and so now they're rebuilding that wall as well. Pasuk Tet. Va'al yadam echazik Rifaya ben Chur sar chatzi pelach Yerushalayim. And the next person who was involved in the building was Rifaya ben Chur. Now, Rifaya ben Chur had a job. He was one of the sub-governors, literally the way Rashi explains it, as a duke. Malchut. Okay, he was a duke. There were in the area of Yerushalayim that we know of from this text. There was the Pelach Yerushalayim. There was the person who was responsible for Beit HaKerem, which is not the Beit HaKerem of today, but the theory is it's Ein Kerem, like where Hadassah Hospital is, that area. There's one of Mitzpeh from the north. There's one Beit Sur, which is in the south, and there's one that is in Keilah. There was another area of the sub-governor who was in Keilah, which is more in the Shvela, which is when you go past the Harei Yehuda to the west. So there were these districts within the area of Yerushalayim, and this is one of them. Val yadam echazik Yedaya ben Charumaf v'neged Beito. And now you have a next interesting piece. All of a sudden, Yedaya is not just working on the wall, he has a personal interest. This is the wall outside his house. And he's making sure that there's good fortification by his house. And Nechemia is going to use a lot of people to do this. And it was basically what happens is there are the honorific places, the big fancy places he has all these important people doing. He has the guilds getting involved. And now he's got the people who are involved because they have real personal interest to make sure the wall is working. Val yado echazik, and I'm still in Pasuk Yud, Chatush ben Chashavniya, Midah Shenit, Hechazik Malkiya ben Charim, Vechashuv ben Pachat Moav, Ved Migdal Hatanurim. And then there's a second portion that was done by Malkiya. Now the problem is, and we'll see this phrase, Midah Shenit, a number of times in our text. There's a second portion, or some people did one part of the wall, and other people did one part of the wall and another part of the wall. The interesting thing in this case, Malkiya, we know the second part he did, we don't know the first part he did. And so again, according to Professor Zer Kavod, what this might mean ultimately is that the text and the list we have is missing some things. It's not a complete list. That there may have been earlier on, not before the time of the canonization of the Tanakh, a list which had already mentioned Malkiya in the first piece he had built. The time of canonization, when we have our Tanakh, we're missing that piece. And he was, again, V'chashuv ben Pachat Moav. If you remember, we've had this idea of a Pachat Moav, of a non-Jew, of a Jew who was a governor over Moab. Moab is southeast, the big area, more east than south. And we have him as well, Vet Migdal HaTanurim, and he built the Migdal HaTanurim. Now, why is this called Migdal Tanurim? Well, we had, if you remember, the Shar Hadagim, and now we got the Migdal HaTanurim. So one suggestion is that the Migdal HaTanurim was right near the area of the city that housed all the bakeries. Okay, so it's the oven gate, good, or the oven tower. V'al yado echazik Shalom ben Halochesh, Sar Chatzi Pelach Yerushalayim, and then the next portion, which was done by Shalom. He also was in charge of a district, Hu Uvenotav, he and his daughters. Now, interestingly, we don't have a lot of daughters that are mentioned in this process, but Rashi says that Shalom and his daughters built the area. The Ralbag takes a different approach. Hu V'notav, he says, listen, nowhere else do we have daughters talked about here. Now, they may have been involved, but why all of a sudden it? And so the Ralbag says V'notav doesn't only mean daughters. V'notav can also mean a subset. And in this case, what he built, He was the Sar Chatzif Elach Yehuda, Yerushalayim. He was the governor over that area, and also areas that were around it, other settlements that were around his portion of Yerushalayim. Those other settlements are referred to as the Banot, as the daughters. It wasn't the mother Yerushalayim, it was the daughters around the area. We don't know what it really means, but it is interesting that the daughters are mentioned here. At Shar Hagai Hechazik Chanun v'Yoshvei Zanoach, and then we get to the Shar Hagai. Now, Shar Hagai, when you get to Shar Hagai, you know you're going to where there's a valley. Yerushalayim being and Ir David were on hills or mountains, depending how you want to describe them. You know, we're not talking Everest. Okay, we're not even talking Har HaZeitim. Har HaZeitim is taller than Har HaBayit. But we are talking about areas that are surrounded by valleys. And so therefore, the Shar Hagai, that gate that goes out to the valley, is on this side. It's going to be on the western side of Yerushalayim. You see what they call the Central Valley, which is right a continuation of the Gay Ben Hinnom, of the Hinnom Valley. The other side, on the east side, is the Kidron Valley. So you have valleys surrounding it. We know the names of those valleys, and this was the gate that went out to the valley. They put up the doors. They built 1,000 amot. So they built a portion of the gate. There was a portion of the wall. There was 3,000 feet. 2,500 feet long. Okay, it's somewhere between 1.5 and 2. I'm sorry, 2,000, about 2,000 feet long of wall. Now that's a pretty significant portion of wall that they took responsibility. Ad Shar Hashpo. They went all the way to the south end. So they basically managed most of that valley wall all the way to the south end, the Dung Gate, which would be at the bottom, okay, of the map. Vet Shar Hashpo Techzik Malkiya Ben Rechev, and then the south gate, that Shar HaAshpot, Sar Pelech Beit HaKerem, he was responsible for the district of Beit HaKerem. Hu Yivnenu v'Amid al Totav. He was one who built it, put up the wall, put up the doors, Manulav, the locks, and Uvrichav, and also the hinges would allow them to do it as well. That Shar HaAyin. Now we have the next one, the Shar HaAyin, which is a gate that is by a well, like a ma'ayan, if you think of the word. That Shar HaAyin echzik shalun ben kol chozeh sar pelech hamitzveh. And now another significant person who was responsible over another area, Shalun, gets to build or gets to re-strengthen the gate of the Ayin. Hu yivnenu V'talalenu, and he also put over V'talalenu, he put over it a roof. Talal is the same word as tzalal. Talal, tet, and tzad switch between Hebrew and Aramaic. And so the word tzel, which is shade, in Aramaic would be tel. And as a result, what this verb means is that he made it so that there was shade underneath, which we would call putting some kind of roof over it. And then he also included the wall around the pool that was for the garden of the king, and until the steps. Now, if you look on this drawing, we're talking about this as a fountain gate, okay, and the fountain gate is on the eastern side of the wall, all the way towards the south. You see, there's a drawing of a pool down there. Okay, and that's where the king's garden was, and that's what we're talking about, all of this area, somewhere in that range. Vet ma'alot hayordot me'ir David. There were steps, and there were steps that went down from Ir David, again, because you're going in a valley, you're going into a Kidron Valley, you need how to get up, you get up and down through steps that are built into the walls. Acharav hechazik Nechemia ben Azbuk. This is a different Nechemia. Okay, this isn't our Nechemia. There's somebody else. Sar Chatzi Pelech Beit Hatzur. He's coming from Beit Hatzur. That's in the south. Ad Neged Kivrei David, until you got to the area where the burial places of David HaMelech were. Okay, and of the royal burial places, v'ad habrecha asuyah, v'ad Beit Giborim, and until the area which was known as the Beit Giborim. Acharav hechaziku haLeviim. Then came the Leviim. Now there are three groups of Leviim who are going to be mentioned. The first is Rachum. Okay, there it's going to be Rachum. Then we're going to have Chashavia, and then we're going to have Bavai. So here are the Leviim who they wrote. Rachum ben Bani. Al yado echazik Chashavia, sar chatzifelech ki'ilah lefilcho, and then comes Chashavia. Chashavia is ki'ilah. Ki'ilah is in the Shvela, it's to the west. Acharav echaziku achehem, and then afterwards their brethren strengthened the walls. Bavai ben Chenadad, sar chatzipelech ki'ilah, who also was in the Shvela area, a Leviim. So the Leviim took care of that next piece of the wall. Vayachazek al yado Ezer ben Yeshua, sar hamitzpah. Midah shenit mineged alot haneshek hamikzoah. Then came Ezer. Okay, and Ezer went ahead, and Ezer did a secondary portion. His first portion was already mitzpah was mentioned back in Pasuk Zayin. So we have that alot haneshek hamikzoah. There was a where it butted out. There was an area of the gate, according to Rashi, where this is referred to as the buttress on the map itself. If you notice, there was a piece there. Acharav hechazik Baruch ben Zabai midah shenit min hamikzoah ad petach beit Eliyashiv haKohen Gadol. And then came Baruch ben Zabai, who went at his second piece that he did, all the way, and he was mentioned back in Pasuk Dalet, all the way until you get up to where Eliashiv. Eliashiv was the first person who helped out in the Sheep's Gate. If you remember, Acharav echazik Meremot ben Uriah ben Hakotz midah shenit. Now comes Meremot again. Meremot we had early on. Okay, he was in Pasuk Meremot. I'm sorry, was the one who was in Daled. Okay, he did it. Mipetach Beit Eliyashiv v'tachlit Beit Eliyashiv, all the way up to the house where Eliyashiv was. Ve'acharav echaziku haKohanim anshei hakikar. Then came the people of the Kohanim, started doing their piece, the area of the open city. Acharav echazik Binyamin v'chashuv neged Beitam. Then Binyamin did the portion opposite their houses. Acharav echazik Azariah ben Maaseiah ben Ananiah Eitzel Beito. Another group of people did opposite their house. Acharav echazik Binui ben Chendad midah shenit. And Binui did a second portion. We had him before in Pasuk Yudchet. Mi Beit Azariah Ada Mikzoah v'Ada Pinai. Did it all the way up to the Mikzoah and to the Pinai itself, to the corner. Palal ben Uzai mineged HaMikzoah v'HaMigdal did from the corner and the Migdal Hayotzeb mi Beit HaMelech that was coming out from where the palace area was, Alyon, the upper palace, Asher leChatzar HaMatara. And then Acharav Pedaya ben Parosh Vahanatinim Hayu Yoshvim Ba'Ofel Ad Neged Shar Hamayim LeMizrach VaMigdal Hayotze. And then we know about that Pedaya did it, and in Pasuk Chavav we talked for a moment just about the Netinim. Now, if you remember, the Netinim were the people who were responsible. They were non-Jews. This was the time of the Givonim way back when, who were the non-Jews who were tasked with doing the menial labor within the Beit HaMikdash, the water carriers, the wood bearers. These were the Netinim who were there, and those Netinim, they lived in the area of the Shar, from the Sharamis Hamayim on the east, the water gate on the east, and to the Migdal HaYotzeh. This is a Migdal HaYotzeh was a large tower that was sitting out there. That was really noticeable itself in their time, according to Rashi. Acharav echziku at Koim. Remember Tekoa? They come back again. Midah shenit mineged Migdal Gadol HaYotzeh ad Chomat HaOfel, and they went all the way up to the Ofel. Now the Midat HaOfel, if you notice that we talk about all these possibilities of what was this large area called the Ofel, but it was an area, if you look in the map, it's almost at the north end, all on the west side, almost at the north, right before where you get to the Har HaBayit itself. Ma'al Shar HaSusim, which was above the horse gate, Hechziku HaKohanim, Ish Neged Beito. Each of the Kohanim strengthened the area around their houses. Now the Kohanim, obviously, the people are going to live closest to the Beit HaMikdash. If you've ever been under Yeshivat HaKotel, okay, under Yeshivat HaKotel, where they found the houses of the Kohanim HaGdolim, Why do they theorize they were Kohanim Gedolim who lived there? For two reasons. One is the number of mikvaot that were there, because Kohanim always need to have access to a mikvah, and also because of its proximity. The Beit HaMikdash, we assume that they were Kohanim. They were, first of all, beautiful homes. They were palaces, they were mansions. So there must be a person of prominence. Mikvaot means there were people who were Kohanim, who would have a mansion who was a Kohen, probably a Kohen Gadol or some other significant Kohen along the way. And then we have in Pasuk Chavtet, Tzadok ben Imer neged Beito, v'acharav echazik Shmaya ben Shchanya shomer shar hamizrach. And then you have the one who is the guard of the eastern gate, Acharav echazik Hananya ben Shelmaya v'Chanun ben Tzelef hashishi midah shenit. And then we have these people who do their second portion. Hanun ben Tzalaf was Tzalaf's sixth child, and that's why it's called Hashishi, number 6. It's according to Rashi. Acharav echazik Meshulam ben Brachia neged Nishkato, and then Meshulam goes ahead and he builds opposite where his offices were, which is on the eastern side of the Beit HaMikdash. Acharav echazik Pasuk Lamed Aleph Malkiah ben Hatzorfi ad Beit HaNetinim v'Arochlim, until you finally get to the area where you had the Netinim were and the merchants were, Neged Shar HaMifkad va'ad Aliyat HaPinah, up to the gate, the muster gate, and all the way until you turn and you have the rest of the corner of the Beit HaMikdash, uvein Aliyat HaPinah l'Shar Hatzon and the smiths and the merchants were the ones who were responsible to finish the gate on the north side, beat up until you get to the Shar Hatzon. So we go all the way around, and if you notice these people who are involved, the names don't mean necessarily anything to us, but their titles are significant. You have a lot of people of prominence who Nechemia brought into this process. And that's what's fascinating about the process. And that's where Zakheim picks up his political piece, where he believes that this was Nechemia's attempt to make sure to get everyone on board, because what he was doing was changing status quo. And whenever you change the status quo, you change an equilibrium, and you never know which way people are going to go. And he knows he's got people who are fighting him. He knows he has people, as terrible as it sounds, who were kind of comfortable with their miserable situation, who had married in, there were Kohanim who married in, who were intermarried. There were all sorts of things. He's going to do a lot of things shaking up. He needs to get the buy-in. One of the ways you get the buy-in is you get the involvement. And then beyond that, one of the ways is you make sure the involvement is something of significance. So if you involve the significant people in the building of the wall, you have it. So who's building it again? And this is just to review what I said earlier. You have leadership who are building it. You have people who he isn't 100% sure about. He wants to get them on his side. You have people who are from the guilds. We've noticed that they have. We have merchants. We have the perfumers. We have the smiths. They're all involved. And you have the people who have direct personal interest, people who were building the wall opposite their own home. Okay, it's just as, nowadays outside your house, if the sidewalk is broken, and the city's coming around, I don't remember how often they come around, they say, well, fix your sidewalk, you have to kick in a little bit of money. We want to make sure that the sidewalk is good. Well, al achat kama v'kama, I want to make sure my security is good outside my house. And so you have all of those people with various kinds of interests involved in this process. That's the building. It is not completed. Okay, we will see in a minute that it's only about halfway done with what all of this is described. Vayehi kasher shama Sanbalat. Now, Sanbalat hears about it. Sanbalat is the great antagonist of the Jews. He is from the north in Samaria. We've encountered him before. He is a descendant of the Gerei Arayot. He is what we will call today a Samaritan leader. They were rejected early on in the process as not being legitimate participants in this process, and they have turned into enemies as a result. They were the ones of Sanbalat and his people. In Sanbalat, we talked about that there were multiple Sanbalats. It seems to exist for a longer period of time. May have been also a title associated with the role. He is going to be the evil person in this process. And so Vayhi kasher shama Sanbalat, when Sanbalat hears about this, Ki anachnu bonim et hachoma, this is Nechemia talking, that we're building this wall, Vayichar lo. He was angry, Vayichas harbe, he was very angry. Ve'al agal hayudim, and he began to mock the Jews. And he's mocking them to his own people. We see this, unfortunately, nowadays in our own political world today, whether it's going to be this person's speech or that person's speech. You just have to listen to the news, and unfortunately, you hear the mocking on all sides. So what happens? What does he say? So he says before his own people and before the military of Shomron, Vayomer, what are these miserable Jews doing? Okay, Rashi says, and umlal is inyana chalshut v'rifayon, a person who's very weak and powerless. What do they think they're doing? Haya azvu lahem? Do they really think that they're going to strengthen the walls? That's the malbim, because we had izavon before. According to Rashi, Rashi says no, that this haya azvu lahem, do they really think we're going to leave them alone and let them get away with this? Hayizbachu? Do they think that they're going to succeed and offer korbanot? Okay, Malbim says, do they really think that by offering korbanot it'll make a difference? They're going to have some kind of miracle and be able to succeed. Hayechalu vayom? Are they going to finish to build this in just one day? We're going to stop them. In other words, we're going to stop them, is what he's going to say. Hayechayu et havanim ha'aremot ha'afar? Does he think, do they think that they're going to bring back the stones that we've toppled back to their strength? Vehemas rufot, those stones, they were burnt. They're not going to ever be used again. Vitovia ha'amoni etzlo, and Tovia was there also, the second of the three great antagonists. Vayomar gam asher hem bonim, and by the way, what they're building, if a fox, a small little animal, will climb on it, you're just going to break the wall down. So even what they're doing is not going to make a difference. It's not strong at all. Now says Nechemia. So we go away from their mockery, and now we're going over to Nechemia. Shema Elokeinu. Nechemia prays to God. He said, listen, God, ki hayinu vuza, we were shamed, ridiculed, good. V'hashev cherpatam el rosham. Turn the tables on them. Create their ridicule, go their shaming against them. Utneim leviza be'eretz shivya, and send them off into a land of captivity. Va'al techas al avonam, do not cover over their sins against us. V'chatatam milfanecha al timche, do not erase their sins. Ki hichisu leneged habonim, because look what they're doing against us. We're trying to build. V'nivnet hachoma, says Nechemia, we're going to build the wall. V'tikasher kol hachoma ad chetzia. And he says that right now, Vatikasher, that we've closed off the opening, the places that have been broken down, one to the next, we've closed them up. Ad Chatzia, halfway already, we were finished. Okay, we weren't done yet, but we've done it. Vayehi leiv la'am la'asot. And the people right now are motivated. They're ready to do the rest. Leiv ha'am la'asot, says Rashi, azeh alev ha'am lahut. Okay, the people are fired up. They're ready to continue to build. And this is the building of Nechemia. We have to deal more with this. We're seeing the antagonism that's arising. And just one last thing. Some of you who are here may have noticed, I normally use my Dat Mikra. The Dat Mikra is the commentary that was written, under the aegis of Mosada Rav Kook. It's a wonderful modern edition. It has a lot of notes on it that you're not going to find in the classic Meforshim. This edition of Dat Mikra was written. The commentary was done by Professor Zer Kavod. Now, Professor Mordechai Zer Kavod was a tremendous scholar. Unfortunately, he passed away relatively young. And one time when I was at Spertus, they used to have used book sales at Spertus. They were trying to clear out things where they had too many copies in the library. And I picked up a copy of from what was then called the Leaf Library, for those of you who are old-time Chicagoans, the Leaf Library, I picked up a copy of Professor Zer Kavod's original commentary to Ezra Nechemia. In other words, before he did this, he did this. And what's nice about it, and the reason I was using it today, and I've shown it to you actually before, is he also does what Professor Haramati used to call shichtuv didakti. Shichtuv didakti is a technique, you find them in the Koran Sidurim, for example, where they break up, it's not block text, but you break up text in a way that helps you understand what the text is. So if you notice, when he does this chapter, he has all of the al yados here and then the actions here. So when you're reading it, it's actually a little easier to understand what's going on. It's not a big block of text, but the breakups makes these kind of long lists possible. My guess is if he was able to print in color, he would have probably done something along this line, okay, which I can do nowadays that he couldn't, but the commentary is interesting. It's also interesting to see the difference. This was done in I'm trying to remember 1948 this was printed. This was printed 32 years later, and it's also interesting to see where he has modified or changed certain things in those 32 years along the way. We'll stop. Both in Israel. This was printed Hotzat Reuben Mass printing, and in the bottom it says Shana Rishona Limdinat Yisrael. Because you're printing. Okay, we'll stop right here. We're going to meet again next week. It's a pleasure to have everyone online with us. Bye-bye.